So, Dr. James, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, good. Thank you for coming by. I mean, I know it's a bit of a drive.
It was, 6 hours to record a podcast. You're worth it.
Oh, I know. So it's been a while. I think it was 2022.
Mm-hmm.
We were at the Capitol with 40 legislators doing a lunch and learn after a rally. And you guys made a big impact.
Good.
For sure. And Iowa's been better off for it.
Good.
Yeah.
They needed to have exposure to the information, I think, that we brought to them, the truth about COVID and what was actually happening in hospitals. I don't think, unless you're really tuned into what's happening, which most people aren't if you're not in the medical field. So I'm glad that made an impact.
Yeah. So now I've been seeing you all over social media lately on some of your new adventures.
Yeah.
I mean, if we had all day, we could delve into COVID as well, but
hopefully that's like an old chapter, right?
Let's
close the book on that.
So what are you doing in North Carolina?
Yeah. So I was on Twitter, which is really the only place you can get the news right now. And I was following a couple people who are really on the ground civilian reporters. And they were out there and they were putting up Starlinks and just talking about the lack of response. And so I waited a little bit, and one night it just hit me. We're going. So I announced it to my clinic the next day. So this is a Thursday. Friday morning, I said, we're going to North Carolina, and Saturday we left. So it was kind of a last minute. It was just a calling that we went down there. We didn't know where we were going to go or what we were going to do, to be honest. We just thought they need some help, and we don't know exactly what that looks like. So I took 5 members of my team, and a few other volunteers contacted me, and we headed down. So we had a couple of trailers, trucks and trailers drive in with our supplies, and my nurse Sherry and I flew in as a forward team to see. We flew into Charlotte and just started driving to figure out where we were going to go, and started networking and making calls. And we ended up at Avery County Airfield, which is a private airfield that usually has 3 flights a week. And the day before we arrived, they had 200 flights that day, rescue missions.
Wow. And what was it that you were seeing that made you know that you had to go down to North Carolina and help?
It just seemed like COVID all over again. The inconsistencies in the story, what you were hearing from people with boots on the ground was different than what you were hearing in the mainstream. And they were saying there's not a response. We are out here. This is private civilians doing this work. And you saw Elon Musk donating Starlinks to get people connected again. And it just seemed like it was a lot worse than we were hearing.
And what were we hearing, and why do you think there wasn't a response?
So we were hearing things like there was some damage, there was some flooding, right? We knew there was a bad weather event, but I think most of us assume Florida gets hit by hurricanes and they just deal with it.
Right.
They have a process in place. And what I really started to notice and realize in North Carolina is this was not a common occurrence for them. This is a hurricane in the mountains. So this was a totally new event. They weren't ready for it, and the people who were most impacted didn't even get notice. And we were a bit blacked out, to be honest, because a lot of the people impacted didn't have electricity or internet to get their stories out right away. So they were starting to just trickle out about that 2-week mark. And after I arrived, then Starlinks were delivered, and we started to see on social media, watching the water rise and hearing that 40-foot walls of water came down through the valleys and just washed homes off of their foundation.
Wow. Are there certain cities that were hit the most?
Yes. So there's an area, I don't know the exact geographic area, but Marshall, North Carolina, down to Asheville, down to the Lake Lure area, and east as far as Newland. I know that area was heavily impacted. And I don't know if you remember, there was a viral story of a mom and her little, I think it was a 6-year-old boy with the grandparents. And they were on the roof of a building and watched part of the family literally wash away in the flooding.
Wow.
And that's one of the first viral stories that got out. And so it just made you think there's more to this, layers more to this than we're ever going to hear about.
Are there any reports of statistics and numbers as far as homes damaged and lives lost?
I've heard those numbers, and I can't remember offhand, but it's hundreds of thousands of homes, if I recall. The death toll officially is somewhere under 300. The death toll, based on what you hear on the ground, is in the multi-thousands.
That's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
It is crazy. And I get that information. I've been fact checked on this, by the way.
Really?
Multiple times,
Really?
fact checked on different individual stories. And there are search and rescue teams that, we're in contact with a lot of people on the ground. In North Carolina, they're a fairly resilient, independent group of people, right? So they're not necessarily looking for government assistance. So getting them help, the first thing we had to do when we went out into these villages or valleys or hollers, if you will, is we said, we're not from the government. We're just private people here to help you. And then they would actually talk to us.
That's interesting.
Yes. Yeah, because FEMA kind of, where FEMA had gone before us, they hadn't made a positive impact.
Right. Yeah. What did they do that left a negative impact?
So I don't totally understand the process for FEMA. This is really the first disaster I've been involved with. But my understanding is you have to go online and you have to file a complaint or file a claim. Well, these people don't have homes, let alone computers, let alone internet or electricity. So how is somebody who's just lost their entire life supposed to do that? So number one, the process doesn't work for disaster areas. Number two, we were hearing from people who their home was washed off the side of the mountain and left a concrete slab. So when FEMA came out, they said, well, we can't inspect your home, so you don't qualify for assistance.
That's insane.
It is insane. Or a family that it flooded both levels of their home and they cleaned one out. And when FEMA came, they said, well, we can't see any damage on this level. And they said, well, we've cleaned it already because we have to live here and it was sewage and mud. And they said, well, since we didn't see any damage, you get half of the $750.
Oh, geez.
So that's the kind of thing that really gets people incensed with the government response, right? When you see pallets of cash being announced by our federal officials that we're sending them overseas, and then you've got somebody who's literally lost everything in their life and they maybe get $700 or some hotel vouchers, that doesn't do anything to get their lives rebuilt and get them back on their feet.
So you were seeing this on social media and you said we have to go down there. And when you talk about your team, is that your medical team from St. Louis or from Sheridan or?
It's our medical team plus. So we drew from, actually the whole team wanted to go, but they couldn't because we had to take care of our patients.
Right.
So small, 5 of us went initially, and then we had a relief team come in. My nurse from Sheraton came down. So we did waves. And what I committed to when we hit the ground is I said, we're going to staff this clinic for 4 weeks. And then after talking to people and understanding kind of going into the winter, we said, we're going to staff it out for 4 months. So that was our initial plan. So we have a contractor that does human resources that was verifying licenses and getting people arranged on the schedule so we could provide housing and orchestrate everything for them.
Right. How many people did you end up taking down?
Our first wave, I think we had somewhere in the neighborhood 15 to 20 of us on and off. Some came and went. And then we started to have government interference in what we were doing. Really? Yeah. So I was there on the ground for a week. We had a pretty good operation going. We showed up on a Sunday night at the airfield, and by Monday at noon, we had unpacked and were ready to see patients. So then it was letting people know we were there, that we were a helping hand. So we started doing that networking. It took a while before people started coming in. We were getting a lot of donated supplies. So really a lot of it was just, what do we have? What can we do with what we have, and getting it organized. So I was there a week. At the end of the second week, I got a call from the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. They said they had received complaints that I was operating a hospital without a license.
Oh my gosh.
Because I had called this the field hospital. And in one of my whiteboards, I had put honky tonk hospital. We were trying to have a good time with that. And so I had a conversation with one of these officials, and they were asking me, are you billing insurance? And have you been inspected? And, are you keeping people overnight? What are you doing? And so at the end of the conversation, I said, listen, I'm not trying to be a hospital, like a field hospital, something totally different. So how about we just stop calling it a hospital? Would that alleviate any concerns that you brought forward? And they indicated that it would, but they said, we're going to send you a cease and desist letter anyway, which I received the next day, to not operate a hospital without a license.
Wow. So how did you handle that?
That was the first round of interference. So I just let everybody know. I'm like, this is ridiculous. Apparently the people who are doing this don't have enough on their plate to deal with the response, and this is what they prioritized. So we're people helping people. We're not a clinic. We're not anything. We're just people helping people. So we removed the name hospital from anything that we had or was doing. We didn't have any signs. We just said medical care, and we did all of that. 1 week later, I was in Sheraton trying to run my clinic when I got a call that the DOJ, the DEA, the DHHS, the North Carolina Board of Medicine, and the sheriff were at our little volunteer operation.
Wow. I keep saying wow. I'm gonna you're blowing me away here. You go down there, you take a team of 15 or 20 medical professionals, you're trying to help, and they're trying to get you to not help or cease and desist.
Yeah. So the first thing they said is, well, they have this cease and desist letter here. And I said, no, we've dealt with that. Like, we're not calling it a hospital. Like, I've already talked to them. We're fine. And then the Board of Medicine inspected us, if you will, and said, everything's fine, no problem. The DEA brought forward a complaint that we were distributing opioids named Suboxone, which was across the board false. Like, there was nothing to that. So I explained to them the next week that people dropped off donations of medications, right? They just brought in grocery bags full of their old meds. And so we organized them and inventoried them, and anything that was controlled, we pulled off to the side and locked up so that it wouldn't go into the wrong hands, or we wouldn't, have any bad actors. So I eventually just said, can we just give this to you to destroy? Like, we're not distributing opioids. There's no problem here. This isn't a focus of what we're doing. It's really distracting. And so they did come and take them and destroy them. So no issue with them either. So at the end of the day, they didn't have any grounds to shut us down because, of course, we're volunteering. We're not charging anyone. And so the county, one of the officials from the county sent a letter to the airport owners, which we were guests of the airport, and basically told the airport that we should leave because the state had set up a clinic, and that our response was, quote, no longer relevant. So
now the state set up a clinic. Were they able to help the amount of people that needed help?
I'm going to say no.
Okay.
They didn't have as many services as we did. Obviously, our clinic is not the average clinic, right? We're fairly high performing. We were doing IVs and IV vitamins and medications, and we had an EKG machine. So we were fairly functional for what we were doing. They had a vitals machine and could send in prescriptions for people that they could go pick up at the pharmacy. So, and being the state run, the people didn't want to use it. So that clinic actually closed 2 weeks later.
So people weren't going there.
Correct.
They were going to your clinic.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we weren't just sitting in a clinic either. I want to make this clear. A lot of the people couldn't get to us. So we would get a notice that, hey, this helicopter is going up. We need a medical personnel to go check on some people. And it wasn't always accurate. Sometimes the nurse would get there and everything would be fine. Nobody needed anything. But we were sending doctors and nurses up in the ATVs and into these areas that were inaccessible. So when they asked us to leave, they really didn't have a plan. The ambulances couldn't get everywhere. So there was no way to serve some of these people who were fairly cut off and isolated.
Well, it sounds like you were doing some great work, and you're still there, right?
So what we did is when we were asked to leave, because we were guests of the airport, and we got along great with the airport. It was really, the first week I was there, it was wonderful. It was miracles every hour. Like, the hand of God was truly on that operation. It was individuals. It's still there as a distribution center, and the people are doing great work. They've set up a 501c3 called We the People, and so they're distributing goods. So they're doing good work. We said, hey, we're your guests. We'll get everything packed up. We want this to go to the people it was intended for. So we distributed it to other clinics that were seeing patients in the areas, and we took our show on the road and we went mobile.
So mobile around North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. So we had our Airbnb, and what we did is we partnered with people who were going up into the remote areas and knew the individuals there, so we could be introduced to them and start building a rapport with them. And then as they needed medical things, we tried to meet the needs as best we could.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how long has that been going on?
We went up there the beginning of October. So yeah, early, like October
months.
10th, I think, was the first time. So we were there. I was there personally a week then. The clinic was operational for 3 weeks. Then we went back for 2 weeks in November, and I'm going back again next week.
So when you say it reminded you of the COVID,
Mm-hmm.
how do you compare it?
So the official narrative isn't even close to the reality on the ground. That's the biggest way. and it's kind of inverse because during COVID, they were inflating the COVID deaths.
Right.
And now they're suppressing them. You know, they were suppressing vaccine injury, just like they're suppressing the truth of what's happening now. I watched a video of a FEMA official saying there aren't people living in tents. And there are people living in tents. I've seen them. So what they're telling, if you believe the official government narrative, it's not true.
So people are living in tents, their homes are destroyed, they're not getting the help they need, and you and your team have gone to help. Did you meet people from across the country doing the same thing, or?
We did.
You did? Okay.
Yeah, there are so many groups. There's religious groups, nonprofit organizations out there. Of course, the big ones, Mercury One and Samaritan's Purse. Samaritan's Purse is located right in North Carolina, so they were impacted themselves, but we're out trying to clean up homes. So a lot of what we've done is very small scale and individual. So when I meet a family or individual that needs something, they build an Amazon wish list. I share it on my Twitter, and we use that platform. I've had Twitter or Amazon list completed within an hour.
That's amazing.
People come in and say, "Hey, I can do this. I can buy what they need." So it's been, you know, again, individual medical care for people who are afraid to go to the hospital or can't get to the hospital. You know, we try to work with their doctors and their physicians because obviously they need to be billing and get back on their feet. But when we arrived, they were 2 weeks behind. They hadn't had power or water or internet for 2 weeks.
That's insane.
They were trying to dig out a hole themselves. So we were just trying to fill the gaps.
So how did that turn into, you know, I've been watching your Facebook feed and some of your videos, and I'm figuring Twitter out. You know, I was never a big Twitter fan because of all the you know, suppression and whatnot, but now that Elon owns it, I'm on it now, so I'm trying
Twitter's
to figure
my best
it out.
platform.
Yeah, I know. Everybody's doing so great except me. I post once a week.
Yeah.
But so how what have you learned, because you've talked a lot about what you've learned about being prepared for something like that. Yeah. And you're not a prepper. I'm not a prepper. I've never been, but I'd like to learn more. And I know people would like, how can they be prepared for something like that?
Yeah. So one of the first things I learned is that when you have chaos, there's always a security concern, which is probably obvious to a lot of people. But we actually partnered with a couple of anti-trafficking groups out there that were there to kind of help make sure families that were vulnerable were protected and kids were not taken away. Or if they were returned quickly. But something as simple as learning to read maps. I don't know if we teach kids in school to read maps anymore, but the cell towers went out. So if you were driving from point A to point B, if you didn't know where you were going, you lost your cell reception in between, you got lost.
Yeah, I can understand that. I remember when we were kids, we would travel and we'd take a highlighting pen and highlight the route and figure everything out. But now it's like I'll drive to the same place 3 times and I don't know if I could do it without the blue line on my phone on the map.
So I would encourage parents to teach your kids how to get a map. Like, try to find a map. We tried. You can't find them. You have to go to rest stops. So I'm in a Christmas, everybody's getting an atlas and a state map. So that's one of the big ones because they get to get around. But imagine communications are down. So we're so dependent on our cell phones and not working. The ham radio operators really were the ones to communicate our needs and get networked, and things would just show up. We would say, hey, we need a tent for the medicals because we've outgrown this. And like 2 days later, a tent showed up and the gentleman built it. So
that was through the radio?
The ham radio.
The ham radio?
Yeah. So
now, is that a little box or is that a hand, like a walkie-talkie?
I think it's a little box.
Yeah. Okay.
I didn't get to touch the ham radios.
It's like MASH.
Yeah. But even on the base, because everywhere we went, they would have to, to go check on somebody, they would send a helicopter. The helicopter would go see what they need, come back, get it, and then take it back to them. We had no way to communicate, hey, do you need this or do you need that? Or what kind of insulin was it? It was a lot of running around. So it was not efficient from that perspective without the communications. So even just on base, you can imagine an airfield. You're running around to talk to people because we didn't have radios. We couldn't text or cell phone unless we had Starlink. Starlink really saved us. So an alternate form of communication and knowing how to do that, I think, is another important skill. I probably will be buying a chainsaw. Not that I know how to run one, but you don't want to be sitting waiting for someone to come rescue you if there's a bad storm and trees are down in front of your road. You want to be able to get yourself to some safety. Gasoline. Having extra gasoline so you can get around. A lot of the places that were in the area couldn't get their refueling tanks in. They couldn't get their tanker trucks in. So the gas stations were running on empty and some of them were flooded. So the gas quality there was not great. So having that, an ATV or a vehicle, utility vehicle, that really saved us in a lot of instances because we could get up to people despite the roads that were out using those.
What about water? I mean, were they able to get water still or not?
So pallets of bottled water showed up.
Okay.
Yeah, the water was out. So the water processing plant was flooded, and so it was all contaminated.
So no electricity? Wow.
So it took them a while. I think it's all back online now, but it took them a while to get clean water. So they had kind of two concerns. One was the bacterial contamination, that they weren't able to purify it. But the other is there's a multiple different processing plants, manufacturing plants along there that got destroyed and their chemicals got washed into the rivers. So it was not only bacterial contamination, it was also chemical contamination.
Why was the response so slow with the federal government, do you think?
I have no idea. I have no idea.
No rhyme or reason?
One component of it is they were really focused on Asheville, which is the major metro area, and then working centrally and out. We were more focused working outward in, working to those remote people back in. So maybe that's one thing of it. I think bureaucracy is a huge thing. Just the red tape of the processes and what they're confined to doing. I don't think the people who work at FEMA individually are probably bad people, right? They're there to help. That they take that job for a reason, but then their hands are tied by the limits of what can be done. I think that's part of it, and it's just there's a lack of common sense. So there's people who are sleeping on the ground in tents, and the Amish have come in and built tiny homes, and we've had RVs donated, and then we run into things like you need a permit, or this tiny house doesn't meet code, and so you can't use it.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So there's a lack of common sense and a lack of flexibility to the occasion
Right.
to just get what needs to happen, and then let's figure it out later, or, advance and improve as we can, but get people more secure than they are if they're sleeping in a tent.
What were the biggest needs that you were fulfilling, or the biggest issues people were having that you and your team helped with?
So basically, after we were asked to leave the airfield, I said, you know what, I'm just a person helping, and I'm medical, but that's not all we do. So like right now we're doing a toy drive to try to help brighten. Yeah, you're contributing.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, we're going to give you a whole bunch of toys when you leave.
That's awesome. I wasn't planning on that. So just like something to brighten their day, right? And try to get some normalcy back so that the trauma of what has happened isn't so profound and a mark on their Christmas. But it's really, it's individual things where we have text threads going all the time, like so-and-so needs a home, or we have an RV that's being donated. Where can we put it? Or we have an RV, but they need dishes and they need bath towels and they need linens and food. So it's really, again, getting to that individual level. There's a gentleman I've been helping that their home was flooded. And so they were living with black mold that was starting to make them sick. Mm-hmm. And so that Amazon wish list was focused on like cleaning that out and repairing what they could repair so they weren't getting sick from black mold.
Wow.
Yeah. One of the more interesting things I did, I was a garbage distributor.
Okay.
So these people have all kinds of debris in their yards, and it's just sitting there. It's not moving. These big trees and cars and parts of buildings. And so to get heavy equipment, we actually asked for $20,000 to support somebody who was willing to come in, just needed his expenses covered. And somebody reached out and said, I'll come do it for free. So he came and was doing that. Well, roll-off dumpsters they were price gouging on them at $25,000 a week. So you couldn't find one, and you couldn't afford it if you could. And one of the people one of the people in our James Clinic network is actually a garbage broker. And so I called him, and I was able to get 5 roll-off dumpsters for a month for $3,000. So we provided roll-off dumpsters.
That's amazing. So I guess I don't I wish I could pull up a map here, but
Yeah.
when you're talking about water flooding in and coming down through the valleys, what does that look like? I mean, as far as the logistics of it, it's coming from the east, from the hurricane, and then how did that all happen? How does that look? What does that look like?
That is a great question, and I don't know if I'm the right one to answer it, because the French Broad River is one of the big rivers that flooded, and my understanding is it runs north. So it's from Asheville, and it's one of the few rivers in the country that runs north.
Okay.
I've heard the Tow River runs south. So the areas where there's water obviously were the worst. A lot of these creeks, and I have pictures, maybe I can show them to you after this.
Right.
You know, just an 8-foot creek turned into a 40-foot river over a period of hours and washed the roads out, washed the highways out. So, you know, somebody familiar with the area said hiking this area is a 10 out of 10 difficulty on a good day in sunlight. And you have rebar from bridges that were literally washed away. You have down power lines. You have all kinds of chemicals in the water. You can't walk through it. So if you were stranded, you didn't have a way to get out, and you didn't have a way to call people, and you didn't have a way to communicate that you were there. So you just had to wait till someone found you.
Yeah, I can't imagine. That would be crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So probably people really out in rural areas that just could not get to civilization or to a town or something.
And we had some false alarms too. They asked us to go check out a nursing home and said that there could be 100 dead people. We don't know. No one's heard from them. And so we took a helicopter and we landed in the parking lot. And we went in, and everyone's like,
"What are you guys
How
doing?
you doing?" They're playing bingo.
Probably had a generator.
Yeah, they did. They had generators go and the fans were on. So we just said, hey, do you need anything? Can we help you? Obviously, you're good.
Right.
And they were fine and said, no, we're good. So intelligence and like coordinating these efforts, there was a lot of duplications. And there were, you get frustrated, right? Because you think you're going to actually encounter something, and then it's nothing. And then when you think it's nothing, it turns into something. So you just have to be extremely patient.
And so during COVID, you rushed out to New York City, right?
Yeah.
Similar kind of thing. You saw there was a need or thought there was going to be a big need and ran out there and did a similar thing. What drives you to do that?
During COVID, so I've always kind of had that drive. I've done a couple of international mission trips, and I've always watched as these disasters happen, and not all of them, but sometimes, you feel called to do that. And I've always been locked into a call schedule. And so I wasn't able to do that for a really long time. During COVID, what made me able to go is that it was a critical care need. So it was in the ICU. So they needed my skill set, or that was a skill set that was helpful. And then the people I was working with coordinated with me to allow me to go. And so I had a work schedule that allowed that. And now that I have my own clinic, I have a schedule that I'm a bit in control of it and can just say, clear my schedule for a week, I'm going. And I have enough duplications that my patients can be taken care of while I go do that. And our patients were some of the most supportive of what we were doing with donations and moving things and praying for us. And it was wonderful.
That's amazing. And what was it like when you went out to New York City? What were you seeing then? I know it was, we didn't really get it.
We talk about that.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about it, but.
Yeah. So I made a video when I landed. I don't know if you've ever been on an empty airplane by yourself.
No, I haven't.
I never had either. So there were 5 people on our flight to New York. So first of all, that kind of tells you, I feel like I'm making a bad choice.
Nobody else is going there.
Nobody else is going. They're all going the other way. So that was interesting. And then when I landed at LaGuardia Airport, it was like a library. So I've never...
Like a ghost town, huh?
It was a ghost town. And my luggage was the only one on the rack. I just felt like I was in a Bruce Willis movie, like an apocalypse.
Right.
I literally made a video and said, I'm in the apocalypse. Because everything outside of LaGuardia was concrete, and you had a bus pull up that I had to get on to go where I was going. And the characters looked like they would look in a movie.
Right.
And so it was just so surreal. And then I drove into the city, and going through Times Square, that's empty. It really feels like some sci-fi movie. And I remember a year after that, I watched kind of the replays of the 1-year anniversary, and it was a bit traumatic.
Yeah. And so did you go straight to a hospital?
I did.
And you were helping with patients and whatnot.
The hospital I went to it was in Queens, and it was had a 22 bed ICU, and there were 75 vented people when I got there. And there were freezer trucks outside that were the morgue extensions. Like, that was all real.
That's crazy.
Yeah. It was nuts, and it was a poor community. And it was a poor, city hospital. So they had Tyvek on the walls. So I really felt like I stepped into a third world country. You had to unzip to get into the ICU rooms. And everybody was, of course, dressed in the garb. So you couldn't get to know anybody because everyone kind of looked the same in their little bubble suits. So it was an interesting, I'll never forget it.
Oh, I bet. And so looking back on that, knowing what you do now, I mean, how do you feel about how that was all handled?
I think at that point in time, in early 2020, everybody was doing the best they could.
Right.
And I really divide the pandemic into like 4 phases. You've got the 2020 when nobody on the ground really knew. And we truly were trying everything. And people don't realize that, I don't think. And then 21 came, and the shots came out, and the narrative totally changed, right? It was a morality thing at that point. So that was phase 2. And then phase 3 is when Omicron came through and everything kind of calmed down. And then phase 4 is really the vax injury that we're dealing with now. So each one of those phases have a distinct personality and overview. So in early 2020, like, really, I felt like everybody was doing what they could. They were doing supplements in the ICU, which I've never seen before. We were trying hydroxychloroquine. We were trying all the things they were talking about. It just wasn't working. Now looking back, I wish we could have done things differently, because I watched about 2,000 people die that didn't need to, probably.
Yeah.
So that's hard.
Yeah, that is hard. And you were, as I remember, I mean, I haven't gone back and watched our interview from then, but you were persecuted for not getting the shot.
Oh,
is that right?
Yeah. I tell my mom I'm an overachiever. I got fired from all 3 jobs in 1 month. So in September of 21, I lost. So it was different at each place. In New York City, Kathy Hochul was the governor of New York and made an executive order that if you didn't have a vax paper as of October 1st, you lost your hospital privileges. So that job just went away, and no one even talked about it. They just knew I didn't get the shot, and I knew they did, and that was it. Which was really sad, because one of my colleagues was getting married, and we had totally changed the call schedule so he could be gone for 3 weeks and go to Dubai for his honeymoon and everything, and I was going to work for him. And so that ruined his plan, not just mine.
Right. And what made you decide not to get it?
So initially the whole purpose of what I did was because I'd gotten sick with it early on, and I went to New York because I had natural immunity. So I felt like my risk was very low. So my whole foundation of my behavior for 12 months
was based on natural immunity, which somehow they decided wasn't a thing anymore, right?
Right. Just magically.
Right. Magically, natural immunity is not the best thing that you can have.
Yeah. So that was the first part. It was never like a big rebel move or major statement. It was just like, no, I'm not getting it. I don't need it. And then as the heat cranked down and the vice grip got tighter, the more they pushed it, I pushed back. And you keep in mind, too, in early 21, not only was I in the ICU taking care of COVID patients, I was in the ICU taking care of COVID vax injured patients. That doesn't get a lot of press.
Right.
But in early 21, they started giving people the shots in New York City, and we were seeing vaccine injury. We were seeing dementia exacerbations and people with heart attacks and strokes and renal failure. And in July of 21, I worked in a cardiovascular ICU. We actually had 5 patients on ECMO, which is unheard of. We usually maybe had 1. And of those 4 had just had the shots.
Oh, wow.
Nobody talks about that on the evening news.
No, of course not.
And so just as it progressed and as the heat got more and as what I was seeing in the ICU was more and more disturbing, there was no way. Like, you could hold a gun to my head, you're still not giving me that.
Right.
So
yeah, and I felt the same way. I mean, it just made no sense to me.
Yeah, and this makes no sense to me. So the hospital was willing
to pull that closer.
The hospital was willing to hire me to make medical decisions for other people, but yet they didn't feel I was competent to make my own medical decision when I literally had a front seat to informed consent. I knew the risk of COVID. I knew the risk of the vaccine as much or more than anybody, but they didn't trust me to make my own decision on that. I think that's a failure of our hospitals.
And that was one of the things that we talked about at that meeting, was the persecution that you were all going through, because we had Dr. Kirk Milhoon, Dr. Kent Denmark, Dr. Bradley Myers, and Dr. Brian Artis, and yourself. And, you know, the medical board was, I mean, if somebody tried to prescribe ivermectin or something, you know, your license was being challenged, right?
Yeah, I was under investigation for 18 months with no accusation of wrongdoing. So the process was the punishment, and that was in a red state.
So what, okay, if you could list, okay, everything we were being told and thought then and what we absolutely know now was wrong. I mean, what would it be? I mean, if it was 5 things.
So number 1, early treatment works,
right,
including ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, vitamin D, a number of other things in our arsenal. Number 2, the severe illness is not caused by the infection. It's cytokine storm, and we know how to treat that. That's inflammation and blood clotting. We know how to treat that. Number 3, the vaccines are killing people. Number 4, there was never an emergency in children, and no child should be getting any of these shots. And number 5, the government lied to us about everything. And I think if you go deeper, there's a concerted effort coming from the DOD to drive this.
Right.
So I think those would be my top 5.
Right. There you go.
Those little nuggets.
Oh, just those. Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah. It's, when I look back on it, it just seems surreal. Do you think that we've learned enough from that we can fight it off? We're better prepared next time?
That's a big question. I think, I mean, I never took a hard stand on this before, right? I was never anti-hospital. I mean, I was in the hospital for 20 years. I never saw a hospital not allow me to do what I needed to do, right? I never thought a hospital would kill patients for cash. I saw it with my own eyes, right? I never would have believed that unless I saw it. I would have never believed the government was actively working against us. So I think for some of us, you know, there's a 20 to 40% of us that won't do anything they say regardless, right?
Right.
And there's 20 to 30% that are going to line up for every shot they ever give, monkeypox included, bird flu, whatever you want to give me, stick it in my arm. And then I think the people that we need to sway are the people in the middle. And I'm a little bit concerned. I think as long as people have their cell phone and their Wi-Fi and their credit cards and they can shop online on Amazon, they're going to be happy.
Right.
And I'm a little concerned that they're going to go along with it again.
Yeah, I was pretty amazed when I remember the first time I went into Hy-Vee with my wife and there were a few people wearing masks and I said, oh, this will never take on here. You know, we're like the Wild West. I mean, this is Iowa. This is, you know, this is the United States. And then before I knew it, I was like one of the only ones not wearing a mask.
Yeah.
In dozens of stores, I was asked to leave. And I couldn't, you know, and I had read all the studies and I couldn't. What really blew me away was that 1 minute, 2 months before, you had Fauci saying, don't go out and buy a mask, don't whatever, they don't work, they're for hospital, you know, whatever. You know, you have Good Morning America with medical professionals on there. You have to have an N95 mask. It needs to be fitted by a professional, and it's not for the general public just to wear around. And then within 2 months, the narrative flips, and people are wearing these cloth masks with big holes everywhere. And occasionally you still see somebody, and it's hanging down, their nose is out. And you think, what is the psychology behind that? How is it that so many people were coerced into doing that? Some like that, and some I know just didn't want to make waves, and
I think it's a lot of it, right?
Yeah.
Don't want to make waves. And I have to say, I wasn't the first to figure it out.
Right.
I mean, if you look back at, and I've archived my videos, you can go back to them on my Instagram. I was wearing masks outside in New York City. It's embarrassing now to watch. It's very embarrassing. But I was one of those people, I didn't question it, right? Because these are authorities telling you what to do. So until the summer of 20, I kind of went along with it. I'm embarrassed to say.
Yeah.
But what really changed it for me was the George Floyd riots.
Okay.
So right before the George Floyd riots, we had the reopen protest. Remember that?
Like, oh, I don't remember that.
Business owners said, we're essential workers. We need to open our businesses. We need to get back to work.
Definitely.
Yeah. And you heard the media come down on them like, you're grandma killers and you're selfish and, you know, you just want to make money. And then 2 weeks later, we have the George Floyd incidents, and now we have the social justice protests. And you literally hear the same people that bash the reopen people say, oh, this is worth it.
Right.
This is okay. Just be careful.
Yeah.
That's not consistent.
No,
that
definitely
doesn't make
not.
sense. Yeah.
Super spreader event.
Right.
I remember seeing Joe Rogan at Wells Fargo. It was like a mosh pit in there, you know, and no, it wasn't a super spreader event. Everybody had to put their cell phones in a little bag, and it was locked when they went in.
Yeah, I mean, some of the things that people did, it's wild, right?
Right.
So I try to have empathy for people, but by now, literally, it's figure it out or die trying.
I had a friend that was nearly, I want to say, murdered in Florida. I called him and he didn't answer, and I texted him. I said, "Hey, you want to grab lunch?" And he was like, "Well, I'm in the hospital battling for my life." And he took a picture, and he was on a BiPAP machine, or just oxygen. Mm-hmm. And he was in for COVID. He had really bad lung issues from it. Mm-hmm. And they kept trying to put him on a respirator or a ventilator, and they wanted to sedate him. I said, "Don't let him do it." I said, "Don't take remdesivir." He was on his last dose of that. They wouldn't let him. I found a doctor in Florida that would, and I'm sure this isn't kosher, but the doctor prescribed to the wife the medicine he needed, ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, a good round of, D3, zinc, all that stuff, quercetin. I think he was also taking a steroid and an antibiotic or whatever, but they would sneak things in shakes and soups because they could bring him food twice a day. Mm-hmm. And they called him a trouble patient. Well, he was like one of 60 that left. Everybody else on that floor died.
Yeah.
And they flew him out of there under the guise of, he told them he was going to get a lung transplant at another hospital. He got to the other hospital, did not go through with that. It was so he could get out of there, and he's doing really well today.
Yeah.
But he went back and he talked to a couple of the families of other people that were there, and they pushed him right down this pipeline to being ventilated and killed ultimately.
Yeah. It got so bad in the hospitals that if a patient did well, they assumed we were sneaking in ivermectin.
Really?
Yes, I heard that from some of my patients that we're sneaking it in. They're like, the nurses think we're bringing something in. That should clue you into the fact that you're doing something wrong. If someone does well and you're surprised and want to stop it, that should be a moment that you look in the mirror and say, I'm on the wrong team here.
Yeah, I remember Dr. Bradley Meyer telling me about that moment where they kept telling him to quit using ivermectin, and the protocol that he learned worked, and he was saving patients, and his neighbor was in the hospital, and he said he was at the sink and he was crying, and he told his wife, "I can't walk by her house every day knowing that I could have saved her." And so he gave her the protocol that he learned about that was working, and within a week he was escorted out of the hospital and they'd fired him. Yeah.
And I finally, in August of 21, I had a couple patients that finally were sick in my ICU that I was able to prescribe, and they were actually able to get the medications. And we had two of the most impressive turnarounds of 2,000 patients. One gentleman went from 80% oxygen to room air in 3 days. It was wild.
Wow.
And what did they do? The next week they took it off the shelf and said, "You can't prescribe it anymore." Instead of asking me, like, what did you do? Like, this is amazing. This is an outlier. We like it. What can we do to mimic that? They took it off the shelf. That's evil.
It is evil. And I remember our first interview back in 22 or whenever that was. You told me that it was almost like ivermectin was perfectly made to combat COVID.
Yeah. It binds the spike protein, it neutralizes the inflammation, it's anti-inflammatory, and it has some antiviral properties. There's like 40 mechanisms of action. If you go back to, some of Ryan Cole's work and things, they break it down and they explain what they are. And if you look at drugs like Paxlovid, it has one. It has one mechanism in common with ivermectin, but then it has 33 classes of drug interactions. So early treatment wasn't cool until we had Paxlovid.
Right. Till something they could patent and make a lot of money off of.
Yeah. So.
And they were giving it away in other countries, right? As care packages.
Ivermectin.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in Uttar Pradesh, India, the WHO went in and they gave people, I think it's the Zyverto, so it's zinc, doxycycline, and the ivermectin and vitamin D. So they would give them these kits. Well, when the WHO reported on the story, they did not include ivermectin.
They didn't report
They
that they
left
had
that
given
out.
those in. Oh, okay.
Yeah, they left it out. And if you look at Joe Verone, I think he said he gave upwards of 1,000 interviews. And every interview, I've heard him say this, every interview we talked about ivermectin, and every single interview it cut it out. They were not allowed to publish that on the air. That is a concerted effort. Like, you couldn't be lucky and just, or unlucky and just have that happen.
Yeah, we all saw him vilify it. I mean, I don't think you could still go buy it at Walgreens or anywhere. I mean,
some of them, it depends.
Yeah.
So I agree. I think people should boycott the big box pharmacies that try to kill them and support the local mom and pops. But every now and then you'll run into one that has a common sense pharmacist that just needs a job, and they will prescribe it or they'll fill it.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had to go to, well, first we had to go to Kansas City, but now, or later on, some of the compounding pharmacies here were prescribing it. But then it was $90.
Right.
It was expensive.
And it still is.
Yeah.
Because now we're using it for cancer.
Oh, and I've heard about that. How does that treat cancer?
That's a good question. Again, it comes down to mechanism of action. It puts pressure on different pathways of the tumor. So we have people call our office all the time asking about that. And I definitely don't encourage people to do that as monotherapy for their tumors and treat them at home.
Right.
It doesn't work.
Right.
But if you do that, in addition to all the things that we do in our integrative cancer approach, I think it can be a little bit more effective.
Yeah. So what do you do with your dogs when you're traveling?
I have the most amazing dog sitter.
Do you?
Yes. Usually I bring them with me, but obviously I couldn't take them to North Carolina. So I bring them up to Iowa usually, and we hang out in the camper with all four of us and the 4 dogs and me.
4? You have 4 dogs?
4 dogs.
I need to introduce you to my friend, Monica, who lives down the street. She has 4 dogs.
Yeah.
And they're rescue dogs.
Yeah. 3 of mine are rescue dogs. So 1 dog is lonely, 2 dogs play together. 4 is like 12.
Okay.
They're always getting naughty in different ways. So, yeah.
That's amazing.
I might rethink that if I would have known.
Well, it has something to do with your personality, I think, that you want to save everybody, including the dogs.
Just somebody needs to save me at some point.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, they're great. And I had 1 die.
Oh,
and so then I adopted another one because my other guy's kind of getting old up there. And then she really had a hard time. So I adopted a puppy, and then he needed a friend. So that's how we ended up with 4.
Okay. All right. And you're headed back soon to North Carolina, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. I'm going to hit the ground on Wednesday, and I partnered up with, there's a lot of groups on the ground I'm working with, again, to provide care, different NGOs and things like that. And then Judges Rescue is an anti-trafficking group that we've been working a lot with. They're trying to get people into Connex homes and things like that. And then Remnant Ministries is out of Texas. They're another group that's doing a lot of different things. They're going to provide security so we don't run into any problems anymore.
Oh, okay. Did you run into some problems with security?
Just what I had explained.
Oh, with
people trying to stop us, and so we'll deal with that.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Did the trafficking, the human trafficking people?
Mm-hmm.
Were there any issues around that? Oh, really? Okay.
There are issues with that. So my understanding is, again, wherever there's chaos, like a disaster, that is where the people move in. And I've heard reports. You've heard of the gang Tren de Aragua. I've heard multiple reports that they were in the area. So I don't know the extent of it or details, but certainly there's some concerns.
What is things are better now or getting better, or what's the trajectory for a turnaround there, do you think?
I think it's going to be years. So, anywhere that there's chaos, there's bad actors. So there were even people that set up fake Venmos that looked like ours that were trying to get donations. There's people on the ground that look like good groups that are robbing people who actually are the good groups. So you have a lot of different forces on the ground. So if you're interested in helping, just find a vetted one and support them, because again, a lot of moving pieces to that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You're like Laura Croft for The medical field.
I don't know. That sounds really cool. I don't think I'm that cool, but I like it.
There you go. There you go. So is there anything else that, what else is going on? And
I would just make a pitch if anybody wants to help us.
Yeah.
This is going to be a part of our James Clinic mission going forward. So we do have a nonprofit we just set up. It's called Starlight Initiative.
Okay.
So if anybody wants to volunteer in North Carolina, we'll probably be there for several months. And if you want to donate, again, we're doing the toy drive now, but we have a bigger vision. I think after winter, one of our board of directors, Corey Schonhorst, has been helping us with get set up. And, you know, he came up with the idea after the snow melts in the spring, all this land is going to reshuffle and shift again, and people are going to lose livable acres. So we want to raise money to develop a plot of land to put mobile homes or tiny homes on so that those people who lost everything have a place to go, and we can just hand them the keys and give that to them. So we have big projects in the works. And then this will be an ongoing part of our mission. We want to be the medical response team. Of all the things, that was what was missing in North Carolina. There isn't a group organized that really does medical, or at least not the way we did it from what I've heard. I'm sure there's others that do it in different various ways, but so.
Well, that's amazing. And I'll put those things in the description, those links, so people can help out.
Yeah.
And I saw something on one of your videos that people were donating campers.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes. We've had a number of campers donated. We have people who've donated money, and we've bought campers. We've had people donate their time to deliver campers from other parts of the country. So that's a huge effort just to get one person in RV, because to get it there, make sure it works, get it stocked, get it set up. There's a lot that goes into that. So I'm just one of the people kind of texting to make that happen.
Well, that's amazing. I tell you, it's stories like that lift people up. You know, we hear so much. We have so many issues in the world, and so it's great to have people like you out there doing the good work and volunteering your time and your skills and your talents, and
thank you.
Rounding other people up to do that. That's amazing.
I tell you, being part of it and being witness to, again, the miracles that we saw and just the spirit, it fills my bucket for sure to be part of it. So, yeah.
Well, we will definitely get the word out for you and try to help you in any way we can. And I know we're going to send you on your way with some baskets of toys. So hopefully we'll make some kids smile when you get down there. So yeah, don't hesitate to reach out, and I'd love to check back in with you.
Yeah.
In a month or two or whenever it is, just to see how things are going, and maybe if you get Starlink in your camp, we can do a Zoom video.
There you go.
Or something.
Yeah, that'd be great.
That's awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us today, and we'll definitely see you next time, and safe travels, and God bless you. Yeah. Take care.